Hello friends, welcome to this channel. This session is actually one of the most important session I say. It is very popular subject at the exam. It is Amazon S3. Amazon S3 powers the biggest website in the world and you probably don't even know about it. Many websites in the world will use Amazon S3 as a backbone. I hope you all guys are excited about it. In this session, we are going to learn many things about Amazon S3 like Amazon S3 buckets and objects, and after that we will see Amazon S3 versioning, then Amazon S3 encryption, and after that S3 security and bucket policy with demonstration. Then in this session we will see how S3 can host static websites, and after that we will see Amazon S3 course. Okay, so S3 is a system, a service that allows us to store objects, so files into buckets or directories, and each bucket must have a globally unique name, as you will see in the hands-on. So we cannot create a bucket that are already being taken in terms of names. The buckets are defined at the regional level. So even though S3 is a global service, buckets are regional resource and there is a naming convention which includes no uppercase, no underscore, 3 to 63 character long. It should not be an IP and it must start with a lowercase letter or a number. Okay. Now in this S3 buckets, we need to create objects. And objects are files and they must have a key. And what is a key? It is the full path to that file. So if we have a bucket named my bucket and of objects named my underscore file dot txt, then the key is my underscore file dot txt. It is the blue part. But if we have folder structures within our S3 buckets, so my underscore folder, one another folder. And in my file.txt, the key is the full path. So that's again, the entire thing is blue. And the key can be decomposed in two things, the key prefix and object name. So if we take the same long example, the prefix for my underscore file dot txt is my underscore file 1 slash another folder slash, okay, that is the prefix, whereas the object name is my underscore file dot txt. So even though there is no concept of directories within buckets, just very long key name, then the UI will try to trick you into thinking otherwise, because we could not create quote unquote create directory within S3. So what we really have in S3 is just keys with very long names that contain slashes. Okay, so now let's go again for this object. So the object's values are the content of the body. So a maximum object size on Amazon S3 is 5 terabytes. So 5000 gigabytes within with which is huge object, but you cannot upload more than 5 gigabytes at a time. So that means that if you want to upload a big object of 5 terabyte, you must divide that object into parts of less than 5 gigabytes and upload these parts independently into what's called a multi-part upload. Now, each object in Amazon S3 can have metadata. So it lists of key value pairs that could be a system or user metadata, and this is to add information onto your objects and also tags. You can also have key value pairs and tags, which is very useful when you don't have security on your objects or lifecycle policies. Finally, we will see when we go into versioning that there is a version ID onto our Amazon S3 objects, and we will see what the value of that is in the versioning lecture. Okay, so now let's go into the Amazon S3 console, and here we can view our old buckets and we can create our first bucket. So I will go ahead and click on create buckets. Next, we have to give our buckets name, and the name has to be globally unique across all accounts in AWS. So if I name my bucket demo, even though there was no demo buckets in my account, scroll all the way down and click on create buckets. I'm going to get an error saying that's the bucket with the name with same name already exists. So I must choose a name that's going to be globally unique in AWS. I can do a demo AWS S3 bucket 2022. I think this is good enough. Next, we have to choose a region. So choose a region that's close to you. For me, I'm going to choose US East 1, but you have to choose a region for your bucket. But the Amazon S3 console is global. It does not require a region selection. So don't mistake it. S3 is not global service. It is a global console. But you need to select a region for your S3 buckets. Okay, great. Then I'm going to scroll down and we have the block public access setting. For now, I'm going to keep them on and we will discuss them when we go into defining our S3 buckets policy and some security around the buckets. And so what we'll do is just keep this setting because we will view versioning and so on later, and then we will click on create buckets. So our first bucket has been created, and now I can click on it and explore the S3 console together. So when we get there, we get we get to the buckets level view, and as we can see we have objects, properties, permissions, metrics management and access point. We will view a lot of those in this session, but for now what I want to do is to go ahead and create and upload our first objects in AWS Amazon S3. So I'm going to click on upload and then add file, and I'm going to upload my file called coffee.jpg from document, and I'm going to scroll down and look at the different setting we have. So as you can see we have a destination which is my buckets right here, and we can view the fact that the versioning for now is disabled. We will talk about versioning later on. We can do other setting and we could look at additional uploads option, but for now let's keep it simple and just click on upload. We will see a lot of this setting later on. Okay, so the object has been uploaded, and so if I click back on my S3 bucket, I can see that the objects now shows the number 1. So there is one object in my buckets, it's coffee.jpg file, and it has been uploaded just right now. Okay, so now let's open this file and have a look at some of this detail. So how about we try to open this file? So there are two ways to open a file in Amazon S3. The first one is to simply click on this open option. And if we do so, this opens a new tab, and this new tab is showing us the coffee picture we are expecting. So this is great. The second way to open a file in Amazon S3 is to use the public object URL, which is right here. So if I copy this object URL, open the new tab and paste this URL, what do I found? I found that there is an access denied. So this is a bit weird, right? Well, the idea is that here we are able to access it and here not. Why so? Well, in the third tab, so this tab, we are using the public URL of our objects, and it turns out that our S3 buckets is not public. So right now this is not public, therefore when I try to access any URL on my buckets, it will not work and it gives me an access denied. It's because my bucket is not public. Okay, so back into our bucket, let's try to create a folder. For example, I'm going to create the image folder, and then I will create that folder, and then within that folder what I can do, for example, is upload another file. I can add file and upload this beach.jpg, for example, and then click on upload. And here we go, my file has been uploaded. So now if I navigate a little bit, my buckets, as you can see, I am into the roots of my buckets, and then I am into the key is named images, and within it I find my beach.jpg. And if I wanted to open the beach.jpg the same way we did it from before, okay, pretty good. Now finally what we can do is go back, so we can see coffee.jpg and the folder images. Click on this folder, delete, and then delete everything within that folder. As you can see, it is a permanent delete, so it says typing permanently delete to delete the objects and the folder. So this has worked, this has been deleted. I can click on exit in the top right corner, and here we go. We have had our first introduction to Amazon S3, in which we have created a bucket, uploaded a file, view that file, and played a little bit with folders and deleting objects, right? So now let's talk about Amazon S3 versioning. So your file in Amazon S3 can be versioned, but it has to be enabled first at the bucket level. So we will do this in the hands-on. So that means that if you are upload a file version with the same key, then it will overwrite it, but it will not overwrite it. Actually, it will create a new version of that file. So instead of overwriting the file that already exists, it will create a new file version, and I am simplifying it here, but it will be version 1, then version 2, then version 3, and etc. etc. So it is best practice to version your buckets in Amazon S3 in order to be able to have all the file versions for a while, because you can get protected against unintended deletes, because you are able to restore a previous version, and also you can easily roll back to any previous version you wanted. So you need to know a few things through any file that is not versioned prior to enabling versioning will have the version null. And if you suspend versioning in your bucket, it does not delete the previous versions, it will just make sure that the future files do not have version assigned to it. So let's go in the hands-on and see how that works. Now let's explore versioning in our S3 buckets. So for now, we just uploaded a coffee.jpg and we did not enable versioning when we created the bucket. But let's go into the properties tab, and the first setting into the properties tab is called bucket versioning. So let's edit it and move the buckets versioning from being suspended to being enabled. I'll click on save change and here we go. Our bucket is now enabled for versioning. So let's choose this and go back into our objects. Great. So this is our first object. But now that we have enabled versioning, we have a new setting here called list versions. This toggle right here, if I click on it, will add a column into the view of Amazon S3, which shows me the version ID. And it turns out that's for coffee.jpg. The version ID is null. That means that we have uploaded these objects before we enabled versioning onto our bucket, and therefore it will not have a version ID, hence the term null. But let's try to upload a new file, and this time we are going to upload the beach picture. So beach.jpg, I'll scroll down and upload. Now that file has been uploaded, let's go back to our bucket and list diversions. Now we can find that the beach.jpg has a version that is very long string, and so this makes sense as we have uploaded a version of the file after enabling bucket versioning. It's going to be assigned a version ID. Okay, what about if we uploaded the beach.jpg file again? So let's upload beach.jpg and see what happens. Okay, back in here I still have two objects, but if I list my versions, now we can see that beach.jpg has two versions ID. This one is one we applied from before, and this one is the new version ID we just uploaded right now. So as we can see, thanks to versioning, every time we re-upload a file, it will keep all its previous version as well as the new version and assign a different version ID every single time. So this is cool. Now what happens if we upload another time the coffee.jpg file? So let's try it out. We will upload the coffee.jpg. Upload. Great. Back in here, list versions. We can see that coffee.jpg has two versions now. The first version that we just uploaded and long version ID, and the one from before has the version ID null. Okay, this is great. Now let's try to unleash the object version. So we just have these two files right here, and let's try to delete the file. So for example, let's take the beach.jpg and let's try to delete it. So I click on delete, and as you can see, we get an information saying deleting the specified objects adds delete marker to them. So we are actually not deleting the file itself, we are adding a delete marker. Let's see whether it's been so. Let's confirm we want to delete beach.jpg and press delete. Okay, so this is done. The object has been successfully deleted. Let's exit this. Scroll down and yes, it seems that my beach.jpg has been deleted, but actually if I click on list version, this toggle again, well, we can see that beach.jpg is still here. But now on top of the two previous version we have delete marker, and this delete marker has its own version ID of size 0 byte and is same to AWS. Make it seem like this file is gone, but actually it is not gone. It just has a delete marker. And so how can I restore a file? Well, I can just take this and delete the delete marker. Now, deleting a delete marker or deleting a specific version ID is called a permanent delete. So, if I take, for example, these two files right here, these two version and delete marker and the previous version, because I want to delete two at once, I click on delete. Now, instead of just saying delete, it says you need to permanently delete because I am deleting specific version ID. So it is a destructive operation before it edited delete marker. But not we are actually deleting the objects for good. So this cannot be undone. I click on delete objects and my object has been deleted. Going back into my buckets, one more time, what do we see? We see my beach and my coffee.jpg are big, and if I list version, I only have one version for my beach.jpg, which makes sense. This is exactly in line with the operation we just did. Okay, and so this allows us to roll back a previous version and restore a previous version thanks to this versioning. Okay, and this is quite cool because, well, if someone goes and deletes a file and we have enabled versioning, as long as it deletes a specific object version, we have prevented again unintended delete. And finally, for bucket versioning, you could go and disable it. It is not suspended, so if you do suspend it, this is going to keep all the previous version that you had from before, but for the new object they will have in version ID of null, and we will replace all the existing previous version. Okay, now I am going to keep bucket versioning on because I need it for the rest of my demos. So that's it for this part. I hope you all guys are now clear with this part. So now let's talk about Amazon S3 encryption for your objects. The idea is that you upload objects onto Amazon S3, and these are servers of AWS, and so you may want to make sure that these objects are not accessible. For example, if someone gets into the Amazon servers, or you want to make sure you get adhere to some security standards set up by your company. So as such, Amazon gives you four methods to encrypt objects in Amazon S3. The first one is called SSE S3. This is to encrypt S3 objects using keys handled and managed by AWS. The second one is SSE KMS, to leverage AWS Key Management Service to manage your encryption keys. The third one is SSEC, when you manage your own encryption keys. And finally, client-side encryption. Now we are going to do a deep dive on on all of those, so don't worry. And it is important to understand which ones are adapted to which situation for the exam, because the exam will definitely ask you question to choose the right level of encryption based on the scenario. So let's do a deep dive first on SSE S3. This is an encryption where the keys used to encrypt the data are handled and managed by Amazon S3. The object is going to be encrypted server side. SSE means server side encryption, and it's the type of encryption is AES 256, which is in logarithm. So for this to upload an objects and sets to the SSE S3 encryption, you must set a header called XAMZ server side encryption. AES 256 XAMZ stand for X Amazon. So X Amazon, a server side encryption AES 256, and this is how you remember the name of the header. So let's have a look. We have an objects and it is unencrypted. We have it written out and we want to upload it into Amazon history and perform some SSE S3 encryption. So for this, we are going to upload the objects onto Amazon S3. You can use the HTTP protocol or the HTTPS protocol, and you can add the editor that we said, the X Amazon server side encryption AES 256, and then Amazon S3. Thanks to this header, known that it should apply its own S3 managed data key, and using the S3 managed key and the object, some encryption will happen and the object will be stored encrypted into your Amazon S3 buckets. Very simple, but here in this instance, the data key is entirely owned and managed by Amazon S3. Okay. Next, SSE KMS. So we have not seen what KMS is right now. We will see us pretty much toward the end of this course on the security side, but KMS is Key Management Service, which is an encryption service for you. So SSE key KMS is when you have your encryption keys that are handled and managed by the KMS service. Why will you use KMS over SSE free? Well, it gives you control over who has access to what keys and also gives you an audit trail. Each object is going to be again encrypted server side, and for this to work we must set the header X Amazon service side encryption to be a value Amazon Web Service KMS. So the idea is that exactly the same, because it is the server side encryption. We have the object we have uploaded using HTTP and N, the header, and then using this header, Amazon S3 knows to apply the KMS customer master key you have defined on top of it. And using this customer master key, so the key of defined and your objects, there is some encryption that will happen and the file will be stored in your S3 buckets under the SSE KMS encryption key. Next, we have SSEC, that stands for server side encryption, using the keys that you provide yourself outside of the AWS. So in this case, Amazon S3 does not store the encryption key you provide. So it will absolutely have to use it, because it needs to do encryption for then that key will be discoverable. For this, to transmit the data into AWS, you must use HTTPS, because you are going to send a secret to AWS, and so you must have encryption in transit. Encryption key must be provided in the HTTP headers for every HTTP request made, because it is going to be discarded every single time. So we have the object and we want to have it encrypted in Amazon S3, but we want to provide ourselves the client side data key to perform the encryption. So we send both of these things over HTTPS. So it's an encrypted connection between you, the client, and Amazon S3. and the data key is in the header. So therefore Amazon S3 received the exact same object, and the client provides data key. And then again it is server side encryption. So Amazon S3 will perform at the incorporeal using these two things and store the encrypted object into your S3 buckets. If you wanted to retrieve that file from Amazon S3 using SSCC, you would need to provide as well the same at client side data key that was used. So it requires a lot more management on your end because you managed to do the data keys, and Amazon or AWS in general does not know which data keys you have used. So it's bit more involved. Okay, and then finally client side encryption. So it is when the clients, so you encrypt the file, encrypt the object before uploading it into Amazon S3. Some client libraries can help you do this. For example, the Amazon S3 encryption clients is a way to perform that client side encryption. And as I said, clients must encrypt data before sending it to S3. And then, in case you receive data that is encrypted using client side encryption, also CSE, then you are solely responsible for decrypted the data yourself as well. So you need to make sure you have the right key available. So as I said, in client side encryption, the customer managed entirely the key and the encryption cycle. So let's have an example. Amazon S3 Amazon S3 this time is just the buckets where it's not doing any encryption for us because it is client side encryption, not server side encryption. And so in the client side, we will use encryption SDK. For example, the S3 encryption SDK will provides the objects and our client side data key. The encryption will happen client side. So the object is going to be fully encrypted on the client side. And then we are going to just upload that already encrypted object into Amazon S3. Okay, so that's the four type of encryptions. Hopefully that makes sense. And I have been monitoring encryption in transit in this lecture, and I will make it very clear what it is. That's around SSL and TLS connections. So Amazon S3 is initiative the service, and it exposes HTTP endpoint that is not encrypted, and it exposes HTTPS endpoint which is encrypted and provide what's called encryption in flight, which relies on SSL and TLS certificates. So you are free to use the endpoints you want, but if you use the console, for example, you would be using HTTPS, and most client would by the way use HTTPS endpoint by default. And so if you are using HTTPS, that means that there is data transfer between your clients and Amazon S3 is going to be fully encrypted, and that's what's called encryption in transit. And one thing to know is that in case you are using SSEC, so server side encryption, and the key is provided by your clients, then HTTPS is mandatory. Encryption in flight is also called SSL TLS because it is uses SSL and TLS certificates. So now let's go into the hands-on to see how encryption works now. Now let's look at encryption setting. So we will go into the coffee.jpg file, and I am going to scroll down, and let's have a look at the encryption setting. So as we can see, for server side encryption setting, right now there is default encryption disable and server side encryption none. So our object is not encrypted. Now we could edit it and encrypt it in place, but I want to show you how it's done as well when we upload a file. So let's go ahead and upload a new file. I will add a file and I will add again the coffee.jpg file. Now we will scroll down and I will look at additional option for encryption. So let me scroll down. We are getting into the server side encryption setting. I will click on enable and here we have different kind of option. So obviously we disable it, and this is no service at encryption, which was the default from before, or we can enable it. So the first encryption type we have seen and learned from is SSE S3. In case we are using an Amazon S3 key, and this is an encryption key that Amazon S3 will create, manage and use for us. So fairly easy. This is what we could do, and we could just go ahead and create that file. For example, with Amazon S3 key. So let's scroll down, upload it, and that's it. We have uploaded a file with encryption of SSE S3. Now let's do it again, but for the beach.jpg. So let's add a file and go for beach.jpg, and I'm going to expand the additional upload option. Scroll down, enable server side encryption, and the second option is AWS KMS key. So SSE KMS. In that case, as we have seen, we still have an encryption key, but this time that encryption key is protected by the KMS service. And here we have a couple of options. We could use an AWS managed key with which is AWS S3, and this would be an easy option. Or you can choose from your own KMS master key if you want to create your own key, which we will not to do right now. Or if the key is not in another account, we could enter the KMS master key ARN. Amazon resource is named manually in there, but to keep this thing simple, we are going to use Amazon managed key AWS S3, and this is going to make sure that the key encryption happens by doing API calls into the KMS service. Okay, so let's upload this file again. Okay, now if we exit this, let's have a look at what we have. So we have 5 object versions. So we have different coffee.jpg, we have different beach.jpg, and so we could look at specific object versions in particular. So if we look at the beach.jpg, we just had and the one from before. Let's have a look at what the encryption says. So this is the one I just uploaded, and if we look at the encryption setting, it's encrypted with AWS KMS master key, so SSE KMS. And if I did look at the piece.jpg we had from before, when we first upload that file, if I scroll down, as you can see, server side encryption is none. So what this means that the encryption setting is just for a specific file and its specific version ID. But this will make sense. So we can upload this file manually and specify the encryption setting for each file. Or if we wanted to, we could, for example, go into properties and specify a default encryption mechanism for the buckets. So how do we do it? Well, for example, let's edit this. default encryption setting. So here we go. I will edit it and we will enable server side encryption by default. And let's see, we want the default every single object to be uploaded with the Amazon S3 key. So we will use this, save the changes, and now let's try to upload a file without any encryption. So let's have a look. So we will go to objects, upload it, and I'm going to upload a coffee.jpg file, but I'm not specifying any encryption. But as we can see, the default encryption is enabled. Okay, but if I go into additional upload option, I'm saying encryption to use the default encryption bucket setting. And so as you can accept, if I upload this file, what is going to happen? Well, let's have a look. I'm going to click on this file ID right here and look at the kind of server side encryption setting it has. Yes, it has an Amazon S3 master key. So the default encryption setting worked properly. And so lastly, you may be asking me, Hastily, when you thought us about more setting, to encrypt file. So why don't we see them? So let's have a look. If I go into the option and look at overriding, as we can see, we have Amazon S3 key, so SSE S3 or SSE KMS. Another one we have learned is SSEC, and we can only do this through the CLI because we have to pass in an encryption key into AWS securely to anchor that object. So this is not something that has developed to be done through the console at this time. So it's not accessible to us. So the SSEC option is not going to be shown. And the last option I showed you, it was called client side encryption. And client side encryption, it means that we need to encrypt object client side. So on your own computer before uploading an Amazon S3. And so Amazon S3 does not really care if it is encrypted or not. It will just take all the bytes anyway. And so this is why this option does not show anything here as well. So that makes sense. This is where we can only see SSES3 and SSEKMS. So we show what is Amazon S3, S3 buckets and objects, S3 versioning, and then in last we show the Amazon S3 encryption, right? Now, first of all, let's talk about Amazon S3 security. So it's very complex, but first you have user-based security. So our IAM user have IAM policies and they authorize which API calls should be allowed. And if our user is authorized through IAM policy and how to access our Amazon S3 bucket, then it's going to be able to do it. Then we have resource based security, and this is the infamous S3 bucket policies. They are bucket wide rules that we can set in the S3 console, and what they do is that they will say what principal can and cannot do on our S3 bucket, and this enables us to do cross account access to our S3 buckets. We will do in the hands-on a very deep dive on S3 bucket policies. Then we have object ACL, which is finer grain, where we set at the object level the access rule. And then finally bucket ACL, even less common, and these 2 points don't really come up in the exam. Okay, now notes. And IAM policy, IAM principle, so it can be a user, a role, can access an S3 object if the IAM permission allow it. So that means that you have an IAM policy attached to that principal that allow access to your S3 bucket. Or if the resource policy, so usually your S3 bucket policy allows it, and you need to make sure there is no explicit deny. So if your users through IAM is allowed to access your S3 bucket, but your bucket policy is explicitly denying your user to access it, then you will not be able to access it. Okay? Okay. So now this is your deep dive on S3 bucket policies. They are JSON based policies. So JSON is a notation language, and so we have here a JSON bucket policy, and this bucket policy here allows public read on our S3 buckets. So as we can see, it says effect allows principal star means so anyone, the action get object on the resource example bucket slash star, so on any object within my S3 bucket. So this is great. This is allows public access to our S3 buckets. So this bucket policies can be applied to your bucket and objects, so both. The action is they allows a set of API to allow or deny. The effect is allows or denied. The principal is the account or the user that this S3 bucket policy applies to, and so some common use cases for S3 bucket policies is to grant public access to a bucket or to force object to be encrypted at the upload time, or to grant access to another account using cross account S3 bucket policies. So we will do it in the hands-on or deep dive on S3 bucket policies. Then we have S3 bucket setting for block a public access. So we have seen this in the hands-on of when we get started. So this was a new setting that was created to block object from being public if the account had some restrictions. So here we have four different kind of block public access setting. We have the new access control list, any access control list, or new public or access point policies. So this is going to block objects and buckets from being public if they are granted through any of these methods. Or you can block public and cross account access to buckets and objects through any public bucket or access point policy. So you don't need to remember these four different settings. It's just a summary in here. What you need to remember going into the exam is that there is way to blocking public access to your S3 bucket through this setting. The exam will not test you on each of these setting, okay? This setting historical were created to prevent company data leaks because there were a lot of leaks of Amazon S3 bucket in the news, and Amazon S3 come up with this way of making sure that any server could say, hey, none of my buckets are public because of this setting, and that was very popular. And so if you know that your buckets should never ever be public, leave this on, and there is a way to set this at account level. As we will see in the hands-on, other securities in S3 you should know about. On the networking side, you can access S3 privately through VPC endpoint. So if you have EC2 instance in your EPS without internet access, then they can access S3 privately through what's called a VPC endpoint. For logging audit, you can use S3 access logs, and they can be stored in the other S3 buckets. API calls can also be logged into the CloudTrail, which is a service to log API call in your accounts. For user security, you have MFA delete. So multi-factor authentications is MFA, in which case if you want to delete a specific version object in your buckets, then you can enable MFA delete, and we will need to be authenticated with MFA to be able to delete the objects. And finally, pre-signed URL that we have seen briefly when we were opening that file, and there was a very long URL, which is a URL that's signed with some credential from AWS, and it is valid only for a limited time. And the use cases for it, for example, is to download a premium video from a service is if the user is logged in and has purchased that video. So the idea is here is that any time of the exam, you see the access of certain files to certain user for a limited account of time. Think pre-signed URLs. So now we are going to do hands-on on S3 security to see all the version options. So let's go to the Amazon S3 console. Okay, so let's have a play with S3 bucket policies. To do so, let's go into permissions, and the goal for us is to define a bucket policy that we will write in JSON, and this bucket policy is going to be prevented putting objects that are not encrypted. So let's edit this bucket policy, and we have two links. We have the policy example, which actually goes to the documentation of AWS. If you wanted to have a read into all the kind of possibilities, you can create a bucket policies, or if you just wanted to follow along with me, then let's go into Amazon policy generator for S3 bucket. Okay, so let's generate our bucket policy. So first we need to select the policy type, and the type of policy we want is an S3 bucket policy. So please make sure to select the S3 bucket policy. This is very important, otherwise you will not see the same option as me. Okay, so we have an S3 bucket policy here, and now we want to add a statement. So what we want to do here is to deny any object being uploaded into Amazon S3. So we are going to have the effect to be deny principle of where from everywhere. Okay, the action is on the uploader. So the API name is it to be upload a file into AWS is called put object. So we are looking for put object here, and then we need to specify the ARN. So the ARN should be the bucket name slash the key name. So let's go into the S3 management console, and here they provide us the bucket ARN because they know that we are going to use it. So let's paste it, and so as I have pasted my bucket ARN, please make sure to add a slash and then a star at the end of the resource name. Why? Well, the action that we have selected, which is called puts object, and the star indicates any objects within that bucket name. So we are saying deny anyone to upload an object anywhere in my bucket, and we need to add a condition here, otherwise we will not be able to do anything with this bucket. So we will add a condition, and the statement is no. So no, the key is going to be looking for the S3. So let's have a look. S3x server side encryption, so this one. Okay, which is going to look for whether or not we have this header when we send a file to Amazon is Amazon S3 and the value is true. So let me explain what I did. We are saying if this header is none, so that's the condition. If this header is known, then deny, and that makes sense. If this header is none, we are sending the file and we don't ask for any kind of encryption. So we will add this condition, and this is our first statement. So let's click on add statement, and we will add a second statement to repeat it. So we will deny from anywhere, and then the condition is going to be again the put object. So let's find it quickly. Put object, the resource name has to be the bucket name and slash star. And for the condition, this time we are going to look at the second condition, and we are saying string not equal. The key is the same key as before. So X service that encryption. And then the value of is, it is going to be AES 256. So we are saying if the file is uploaded but with the header, but the header value is not equals to AES 256, which is representing the SSE S3 type of encryption, then deny it. So we will add the condition at the statement, and here we go. We have generated our policies right here. Save changes, and we are good to go. So here we have defined a bucket policy which denies any object being encrypted if it's not encrypted with SES3. So we can, for example, have a look. So let's upload an object and see if that's work. So we will add a file. We will add coffee.jpg again. And as we can see, I don't specify any encryption setting in particular. Okay. So it's going to go with none and click on upload. It failed, and we can look at why it failed. So it failed, access denied. And so this is due to the bucket policy. So this is obviously good because this is what we expected to happen. And if we try to upload the same file, so coffee.jpg, but this time we are going to specify the encryption to be SSE-S3. So by setting the right header, then this should work. So let's upload it and see. Yes, this has success. And finally, let's start to upload this file one last time, but by specifying a KMS type of encryption. So let's go to override KMS using the SSE S3 KMS key, and again click on upload, and this has failed again because it does not respect the bucket policy. So the bucket policy is working just fine. And so how did I figure this out? So if I Google S3 bucket policy denied encryption, this shows you the kind of blogs that shows you how to write this kind of let me show you. I have buckets policy, so this is not something invented. I use the documentation to refer for my courses, but I wanted to show you how to generate this policy using the ADA policy generator. Okay, hopefully this makes sense. Now other setting that we may want to look for it for security. So let's go into permission, and if we go into permission, we can see that there is block all public access setting, and so this is on by default. And just to prevent any data leaks from AWS S3 into the world, and so we want to keep this on at all time unless we are running a public website and want to make the object public. So we will see how to do this in our future lecture. So also we can define this blog public access setting at my account level. To do so, on the left hand side, I can do account setting for blog public access if I wanted to by taking this block. So this is one more level of security. Okay. And then finally, for all my objects, if I look at coffee.jpg, there is something called ACL, or access control list. And this is something I will not linger on because we are not using this and the exam really does not touch it. But access control list is a way for you to define objects, reads and writes at the object level. So as we can see right now, my accounts can read the objects and read writes. Thanks for the ACL. Anyway, I will not linger on it because this is not very important for the exam. But just know that ACLs are another way to protect your objects in AWS. Okay, let's talk about S3 websites. S3 can host static websites and have them accessible on the World Wide Web. And the website URLs will be very simple. It will be an HTTP endpoint and it can look like this or like this. Depends on the region you are in. The idea is that it starts with the bucket name dot S3 websites and then the AWS region dot Amazon AWS.com. And if you enable it for a website but you don't set a bucket policy that allows public access to your buckets, you will get a 403 4-bit error, and we will see how to fix this in this hands-on. Okay, so let's go ahead and enable our S3 bucket as a website. Okay, so let's go ahead and make this website as a static website. So first to do, so let's just make sure to remove the bucket policy we had from before. So I'm just going to delete it so we can upload object without any problem. Okay, great. So now let's go back into our objects. We want to upload an index.html file, which is very simple HTML document, which is called my first web page says I love coffee, hello world, and this will load the coffee.jpg file, right? Okay, so pretty easy and pretty good so far. Next, we will also have error.html file. We just say, oh, there was an error. Okay, great. So let's go ahead and upload these two files. So I'm going to add files and I am going to upload both the index.html and error.html. Here we go. And next, I want to scroll down and click on upload. Here we go. So now our buckets contain these four files and we want to able to have a look at them. So to do, so we are going to go into properties and make our bucket a website. So if I scroll down and I go to static website hosting, I can see is disabled right now, but let's go ahead and edit it. We want to enable it and we will host a static websites, and then the index document is called index.html and error document error.html, right, which correspond to the two files we have just uploaded. We will save the change and now our bucket is ready to be a static website host. So if I scroll down all the way down, we can find the bucket website endpoint. So let's try it out and I'm going to copy this, open a new tab and paste it here. And what do I found? Well, we see 403 forbidden error, right? So we are not allowed to access our buckets, and this makes sense, right? Because if we go back all the way up, and currently the bucket and the objects are not public, and it turns out that we are trying to access them publicly. So how do we do so? Well, two steps. We go to permission. First, we want to disable a block public setting. Otherwise, we will never be able to be to make our bucket public. So let's edit this and untick block all public access. And this is going to allow us to make some objects public and to set a public buckets policy. So I did confirm it, and that's the first step. And second step is we are going to bucket policy, and we are going to write a bucket policy which allows a public access. So let's go into policy generator one more time, and is going to be an S3 bucket type of policy. We are going to allow anyone, so principal star. To do this time, not to put objects but to get object. So let's do a get objects, and ARN is going to be again the buckets ARN and slash star. It's saying anyone can do a get object on any objects of this bucket. This makes sense. I click on add statement, generate policy, copy this and paste it here. And here we go. Now this bucket policy has made my S3 bucket public. How do I know? Well, now under access it says public, right? And there's a little warning sign because AWS does not really want you to have public bucket, and they want to be you to be very careful anytime you make anything public on Amazon S3. Okay, so now if we go back to this URL and refresh it, we can see there is I love coffee, hello world, and the coffee.jpg file. So this works great. And if I tap a random URL, for example, does not exist.jpg, I am going to get, oh, there was an error, right? Which corresponds to the error.html file. Okay, we have defined from before, so all good. We have made our S3 bucket now a static website host, which is great. And now we will see our next topic, which is Amazon S3 course. So let's talk about S3 course or cross origin resource sharing. And this is a complicated concept, but it does come up by the exam in very simple use cases. But I want to go deep into course to really explain to you how it works, because it will make answering the question extremely easy. So what is an origin? An origin is a scheme, so a protocol, a host, a domain and a port. In English, what that means is that, for example, if you do https://www.example.com, this is an origin where the scheme is https and the host is www.example.com and the port is port 443. Why? Because as soon as you have https, it is port 443 as an implied port. Okay, so course means cross origin resource sharing. So that means we want to get resources from a different origin. The web browser are having this security in place. Course basically saying as soon as you visit a website, you can make a request to other origins only if the other origin allows you to make this request. This is a browser based security. So what is the same origin and what is different origin? Well, for example, same origin is this, where you go on example.com app1 or example.com app2. This is the same origin. So we can make request from the web browser from the first URL to the second URL because this is the same origin. But if you visit, for example, www.example.com and then you are asking your web browser to make a request to other.example.com. This is what's called cross-origin request, and your web browser will block it unless you have the correct course header, and we will see what these are in a second. So now that we know what is the same origin and what is a different origin, we know that the request will not be fulfilled unless the other origin allows for the request using the course header. And the course header is this one you will see in the hands-on called access control allow origin. Okay, so that's just for the theory. Now let's go in the diagram and it will make a lot more sense. So here is our web browser and it visits our first web server, and because this is the first visit we do, it is called the origin. So for example, our web server is at https://www.example.com. Okay, great. And there is a second web server called a cross origin because it has a different URL, which is https://www.other.com. So a web browser visit our first origin and it's going to be asked for the files that are uploaded from the origin to make a request to the cross origin. So what the web browser will do is that it will do what is called a pre-flight request, and this pre-flight request is going to ask the cross origin if it is allowed to do a request on it. So it's going to say, hey cross origin, the website https://www.example.com is sending me to you. Can I make a request onto your website? And the origin is saying, yes, here is what you can do. So the access control allow origin is saying, is this website allowed or not? So yes, it is allowed because now we have the same origin here, the green one, as we had on the left hand side. And the methods that are authorized is get, put and delete. So we can get a file, delete a file or update the file. So okay, so this is what the cross origin is allowing our web browser to do. So this is the course method, and therefore because our web browser has been authorized to do so, then it can issue, for example, a get to this URL, and it will be allowed because the course headers received previously allowed the web browser to make this request. Okay, so this may be new to you, this may be a lot, but you need to understand this before we go into the next use case, which is the S3 course. So if a client does a cross origin request on our S3 bucket enable as a website, then we need to enable the right course headers. It's a very popular exam question, okay? So you need to understand when we need to enable course headers and where we need to enable course header. So we will see this in hands-on as well. So we can allow for a special origin by specifying the entire origin name or as a star for all origins. So let's have a look. The web browser, for example, is getting HTML files from our bucket, and our bucket is enabled as a website, but there is second bucket that is going to be our cross origin bucket, also enabled as a website, that contains some files that we want. So we are going to do get index.html, and the website will say, okay, here is your index.html, and that file is going to say you need to perform a get for another file on the other origin. And if the other bucket is configured with the right course header, then web browser will be able to make the request. If not, it will not be able to make that request. And that is the whole purpose of course. So as we can see here, the course header we have to be defined on the course origin bucket, not the first origin bucket. Okay, so this is just for theory. We are going to go into the hands-on to see how we can explain this concept in a much more practical way. Okay, so let's demonstrate how the course setting work in AWS. So if we go to this index.html file, we can see that there is a course demo part. And so what is this code doing? Well, this code launches a script, and the script is going to fetch a page called extra page.html and then return the response text on that extra page.html, right? So something is very simple. We make the index HTML, load another HTML document, and this other HTML document is extra page.html, and it say this extra page has been successfully loaded. Okay, so this is great. Now we want to upload this new file version onto our S3 buckets. So let's do it right now. We are going to go into our S3 buckets, and I am going to upload a file, add file, and I will upload both the extra page and the index.html that I just modified. I will upload these two files. This is working. Great. Let me go back into my bucket, and I close my website, so I am going to reopen it. And if you look at my first web page now, it says I love coffee, hello world, but at the bottom it says this extra page has been successfully loaded, and this is exactly what we wanted. And if I do slash extra page dot html, press enter, we will just get the little bit, this extra page has been successfully loaded. So this has worked because both my index.html and my extra page.html file are on the same bucket. So they are what's called same origin. Okay, but now we want to test for course query. Okay, so different origin. So for this we are going to create a new bucket. So let's go back into Amazon S3, and I am going to create a bucket, and this one I will call it demo AWS course 2022. Okay, and I will choose a region, so US East 2, and then I will unblock the public access because we want to be that file within the bucket to be publicly readable. This is good, and create the bucket. So I am going to configure that bucket to be a website. So we will scroll down, and at the very bottom in static website hosting, so I enable it, host a static website, and I will just have the same setting as before. Even though we are not specifying this file, this does not really matter. So this is good. The next thing we have to do, so if I go to the website right now, it is not going to work. The next thing I have to do is to, under permission, create a bucket policy and make it public. So I'll do again to my policy generator, or I can just copy it from the one I have before. So let's copy this bucket policy, it's going to be easier. I paste it, and please make sure to change the resource ARN right here by the one we have just created. Okay, so this is good. This has made my bucket public. So let's upload the file, extra page.html and upload. Here we go. This has been uploaded. So now if I try to finally reload this, we get this extra spread has been successfully loaded. So what I have done is that I have been set up my two websites. I have set up my first website and my second website, which just contains the extra page.html. And now I am going to go back into my main bucket, and I am going to first of all remove this extra page.html. So I am going to delete it and type delete. Okay, and now if I exit and go to my first web page and refresh this, I am going to get an error because yes, it cannot load the extra page.html. And the second thing I have to do is to edit my index.html file to fetch this document from the new bucket URL. So let's copy the full URL right here and paste it here. Okay, so now we have HTTP, the name of the target bucket. We want to load our asset from extra page.html. Now I am going to re-upload that file into our main bucket. So I will upload it at the file, and it is the index.html. Press upload and it has been successfully uploaded. So now you know you are saying fetch this file from this new bucket, right? So it should be definitely work. And this is where cores come into play. So let me refresh this page right here. There was no more error, but now we don't see that extra page. So that means that the second bucket from the first bucket has been blocked by the course policy because no access control allow origin header is present on the request resources, right? So this is where we need to set the course policy on the second bucket. Okay, so this is the error we get. And now let's change the course in the second bucket to allow the first bucket to make a request to it. So how do we do that? Well, we go to our second bucket, so this one, and under permission I will scroll down and find cross origin resource sharing, which is course. And now we have to define it in JSON. So I will edit this. It used to be XML, but now it is JSON. So we need to paste it in the correct course to allow my web page to work. So thankfully enough, I have coded for this as. So course config.json, copy it and paste it, and you need to, for allowed origin, put the URL of the first bucket with HTTP, so without the slash at the end. So let's take this website, which is the one we are doing, and we paste it right here. So we do have the HTTP slash slash, and then please remove the last slash at the end. So we allow this origin to make a request onto the second bucket. I understand this is a bit advanced. Obviously, if you don't want to follow the hands-on, that's fine, but just remember the idea of course, obviously. But let's finish this hands-on. So course has been edited and that should be it. Now, if I go back to my first web page and refresh this, now we get no more error, and yes, this extra page has successfully loaded thanks to the course setting. Okay, so I understand this is quite an advanced hands-on, and you may not be an IT expert, and this is fine. You don't need to remember all this step of what I did. Just remember that if website number 1 need to access a resource on website number 2 through a web browser, then website number 2 needs to have a course setting, okay, to allow the request to be done. Otherwise, the web browser is going to block it, and this is what I wanted to demo you through this hands-on. So that's it. I hope you understand this. If you have any doubt, then feel free to ask in the comment section below. We definitely try to clear your doubt. Okay? And I will see you in the next lecture. So stay tuned. Thank you for watching. Bye and have a nice day.